Let's talk about blackbirding. All right, blackbirding is what it's called. All right, specifically, let's get into it. Blackbirding was the trade in indentured laborers. Notice what it said: indentured laborers. But keep that in mind. From the Pacific in the 19th and early 20th centuries, in the 18 and 1900s. Oh, excuse me. Yes, 18 and 1900s. It is often described as a form of slavery. Despite the British Slavery Abolition Act in 1833. And, by the way, how the U.S. did the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Yet in the late 1800s and early 1900s, you had this trade where indentured laborers were being sent all over the Pacific. Let's see. It said Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 banning slavery throughout the British Empire, including Australia, right? So it should have been illegal to do this, right? The trade frequently relied on coercion, deception, and kidnapping. What's it called when you kidnap someone into indentured servitude? What's that called? Oh yeah, that's called slavery. All right? So they try to use these different terms. Oh, it's not slavery, it's blackbirding. Oh, it's not slavery, it's indentured servitude. There were indentured laborers, not slaves. This is slavery. This is slavery on ships. That's exactly what this is. All right? To transport tens of thousands of indigenous people from the islands in the Pacific Ocean to Australia and other European colonies, often to work on plantations in conditions similar to the Atlantic slave trade. So you had the Atlantic slave trade and the Pacific slave trade. All right. You also had a Trans-Asian slave trade, and that's not necessarily what we're getting into tonight. But you had slave trades all over the world. All right. Trans-Saharan slave trade. All this happened throughout the Middle Ages and colonial periods. All right. These blackbirded people, known as Kanakas or South Sea Islanders, were taken from places such as Papua New Guinea, right? I had mentioned that when talking about Judah. The Solomon Islands, again, when talking about Benjamin. Vanuatu, Niue, Easter Island, the Gilbert Islands, Tuvalu, and islands of the Bismarck Archipelago. So all of that is in, as it said, the South Pacific Islands, or South Sea Islanders, all right? All that's in the South Pacific. The owners, captains, and crews of the ships involved in the acquisition of these laborers were termed blackbirders. All right, because they had to use a code word because they weren't supposed to be doing this. All right, blackbirding ships began operations in the Pacific from the 1840s and continued in some cases into the 1930s. All right, so this was the Great Depression they were doing this. All right. The demand for this kind of cheap labor principally came from sugarcane, cotton, and coffee plantations. Where have I heard all that before? It's the same thing that happened over here in the West. All right. In New South Wales, that's in Australia, Queensland, Australia, Samoa, again, that's in the Pacific, New Caledonia, that's just east of Australia, Fiji, all right, that's even more east in the Pacific, closer to Samoa, Tahiti, all right, and that's in French Polynesia, which again, more east, but it's in the Pacific, and Hawaii. That's, at that time, a U.S. territory, became a U.S. state, all right? But yes, slavery in Hawaii, all right? No, and I'm going to keep reading, but it doesn't specifically mention it here, but Puerto Ricans were sent on slave ships to Hawaii, by the way. But it's going to say Latin America. In Auckland, that's in New Zealand, a small group of South Sea Islanders worked in flax mills. All right, so notice this time period, 1800s to 1900s, there's industrialization going on. So it's not just the plantations, they were putting them in factories as well. All right, they were putting these slaves in factories as well. Examples of blackbirding outside the South Pacific include the early days of the pearling industry, in Western Australia, right? So working on ships, or working in, on reefs and whatnot. At Nickel Bay and Broome, where Aboriginal Australians were blackbirded from the surrounding areas. In Peru, Mexico, Guatemala, and elsewhere in the Americas, blackbirders sought workers for their haciendas and to mine the guano deposits on the Chincha Islands. Right? So that's from everywhere from Australia to Mexico. They had this slave trade going on well into the 1900s. All right. So that's just the general overview. All right. That's just the general overview. All right. In Deuteronomy 28, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there, meaning once you get there among all people, thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. You would partake in other religions. All right. What I also want to get to, because this mentions blackbirding in the 19th and 20th centuries, right? This mentions slavery in the Pacific in the 1900s. It started way before then. All right. Slavery in the Pacific. So here's the history of Spanish slavery in the Philippines. All right. So it says Spanish slavery was introduced to the Philippines through the encomienda system, which was instituted throughout the Indies by Nicolas de Ovando, governor of the Indies, from 1502 to 1509. You see it right there. So it started in the 1500s. The Spaniards would go over there to the Philippines and start putting people in slavery. All right. So it said this system rewarded the Spanish conquerors with forced labor from the native peoples. A system of serfdom, the pre-colonial Alapin system, already existed before the islanders were colonized, before the islands were colonized by the Spanish Empire in 1565. But it differed in that groups of native people were not obliged to render forced labors to their superiors. However, rather the Alapin rendered services and labor on a complex system of obligations. All right. So it said, indeed, the etymology indicates that they were originally war captives rendering ransom, right? So they would capture the people and put them in slavery, all right? So it goes on to say that Bartolomé de las Casas wrote about this, so the Spain had to change their laws because of the public outcry. They said, look, y'all treating these people, this ain't Christian, the way y'all treating these people, all right? So they had to change some laws. According to his first-hand accounts, enslaved natives in the Indies were burned alive, starved, forced to work in mines, and the women stopped producing milk because of the hard labor they were forced into. You see that right there. So, and again, I got that book, A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. All right. So it says, while no similarly graphic accounts exist of the abuses endured by the native Filipinos, right? So he didn't visit the Philippines. Bartolomé de las Casas visited the Americas, right? But he saw what the Spanish were doing and he wrote about it, and the public outcry forced the Spaniards to change laws, right? Several revolts occurred due to encomienda even after the passage of the new laws, and continued abuse of the system was recorded, right? So the same way that when slavery was abolished in America, they went to the Pacific, as we were just reading, and abused the system. The same way the British did after slavery was abolished in their whole empire and commonwealth, the way that they abused the system over there, it's the same way the Spaniards did. They would pass the law to say, hey, look, we're good, we're not going to do this stuff no more, and then they would keep doing it. From the late 16th century to the early 17th century, Spanish soldiers, officials, and settlers often acquired slaves through the pre-existing native Alapin system as a way to skirt around the new laws. Many of these slaves were taken back to Nueva España, where they were called chinos, all right? Nueva España is the Americas, right? So you got a lot of people in Mexico who don't even, well, some of them realize it, but some of them don't, who are descended from these Filipinos who was taken over there as slaves, all right? And vice versa, all right? They would bring Mexicans over into the Philippines and make them work as slaves as well, all right? So, it said they were called chinos in Spain. They sent them to Spain as well. as personal servants or slaves of the Spanish crew and passengers of the Manila galleons. In addition, many native Filipinos were also pressed into service as sailors for the galleons, often under harsh conditions. These practices and the indigenous Alpin system were eventually stopped by the mid-1600s after additional royal decrees, which mandated harsh punishments for violations of the laws of the Indies, as well as heavy taxes levied on personal servants brought aboard galleons. Slavery of the people who were not under Spanish jurisdiction, however, was not banned. Right? So it says slaves purchased from other slave markets in Southeast Asia passed through Manila and onward to Mexico in the Manila galleons. Right? So they just moved from the Philippines and started grabbing slaves from other territories they owned. All right? Native captives of Spain from the Spanish-Moro conflict were also enslaved in this way. Right? So that was in the Philippines. Conversely, Filipinos who were subjects of Spain were often enslaved by Moro pirates and raiders. They were either integrated as slaves into the Moro sultanates, ransomed to relatives, or sold further onto the Dutch East Indies, all right, and the Chinese, right? So, again, passing of slaves, when it says the Dutch East Indies, that would be your Myanmar and Singapore. So all that is connected. As far as the slavery that went on all throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific, all right, and the Americas. All of that is connected, all right? And it also says the Moabites. And as I described when going into, I think it was last week, when going into how the Filipinos are Issachar, they have always, at least since colonial time periods, have been burdened on both sides between Esau and the Chinese, all right? Esau and the Moabites, all right, became a servant under tribute, right? So, from there, because we're done with Tasmanian people, blackbirding, and even this history here. So we're on to Joseph. I'll close out talking about Joseph, but I do just want to read here in Deuteronomy 28:68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again, meaning slavery again, with ships. The people who went on slave ships, whether it be the Trans-Asian slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, the Trans-Pacific slave trade, regardless, that's Israelites, all right? And I'll just show y'all real quick this map that I just found concerning the Trans-Pacific slave trade and how, or really just slave trade in general, all over the world. It's from a top view down. This map is actually pretty interesting. And it shows all the different areas. So this is the, as it shows here, how, and this is specifically the Trans-Pacific slave trade, because it doesn't show any of the transatlantic slave trade, but I got a different map for that. As you see here, you had silver trade and silver mines. You had all the different empires, and they would take people from all these different areas. You see, they would take people from the Philippines and ship them west and east. They would take people from the Americas, ship them west and east. And they obviously they would start in Europe and ship slaves to Europe as well, and also into India, as we're about to get into here shortly, throughout the Ottoman Empire as well. So let's get out of this. Yeah, so as y'all can see, all over the world, that's the route that they went, all over the world. I just kind of zoomed out a little bit so y'all can see it a little better. All over the world. All over the world. So I'll come back to this. As I just read a while ago, among all people, scatter thee among all people. That's what happened to the Israelites. All right. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there, once you get off the ships, ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. Or sometimes I'll call you indentured laborers. And no man shall buy you, meaning nobody's going to get you out of that. Nobody's going to buy you out of slavery, as was custom in ancient Israel to do.